The shy waitress greeted the millionaire's deaf mother, but what she said in sign language shocked everyone. Subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. Don't miss out. Let's dive in. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floors of the Grandmont, as Clara Jensen adjusted her black uniform for the third time that evening. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nerves about serving Chicago's elite, but from the familiar weight of hiding who she really was. At 26, she had perfected the art of invisibility, moving through the restaurant like a ghost with a smile. "Table 12 needs their wine refilled," called Brenda, the head waitress, barely glancing up from her order pad. "And try not to spill anything on Mr. Vance tonight. He's already complained twice about the temperature in here." Clara nodded, gathering the bottle of Chateau Margaux that cost more than she made in a month. Ethan Vance. Even his name sounded like money. Old money, new money. The kind of money that made people bow their heads and avert their eyes. She'd been serving his table for 3 months now, and he'd never once looked at her as anything more than a piece of furniture. The dining room hummed with the quiet conversations of people who never worried about rent, about medical bills, about whether they'd have enough left over for groceries after paying for their children's school supplies. Clara knew that world intimately. She'd lived in it once, in what felt like another lifetime. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was sharp, commanding, with just a hint of impatience that made Clara's spine straighten automatically. She turned to find Ethan Vance standing closer than she'd expected, his steel-grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter inappropriately. He was tall. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze, with dark hair that looked like it had been styled by someone who charged more per hour than Clara made in a week. His suit was immaculate, probably Italian, definitely expensive. "Your wine, sir," Clara said softly, lifting the bottle slightly. "Not for me." Ethan gestured toward the elegant woman sitting at the table behind him. "My mother. She's been trying to get your attention for the past 10 minutes. Clara's gaze shifted to the woman, and her heart clenched. Mrs. Vance was probably in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a classic chignon, and kind eyes that seemed to hold a universe of stories. She was making subtle hand gestures, her face lit with a hopeful smile. Without thinking, Clara set the wine bottle on the nearest table and approached Mrs. Vance. "Good evening," she signed, her hands moving with practiced grace. "How may I help you?" The woman's face transformed with delight, her hands dancing as she responded. "Oh, how wonderful. I was hoping to compliment the chef on the salmon. It reminds me of a dish I had in Rome years ago." "I'll make sure he receives your kind words," Clara signed back, genuinely smiling for the first time all evening. "Would you like me to ask him about the preparation?" "I believe he uses a special herb blend." Behind her, she was vaguely aware that the entire restaurant had grown quieter, but she was focused on Mrs. Vance's animated response about her travels through Italy and how few people took the time to really communicate with her. "You're very kind," the older woman signed. "Most people just smile and nod when they realize I'm deaf." "You signed beautifully. Where did you learn?" "I studied linguistics in college," Clara replied automatically, then froze as she realized what she'd just revealed. "Linguistics?" Ethan's voice cut through the moment like a blade. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What university?" Clara felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. She'd been so careful for so long, and now one moment of genuine human connection had cracked her carefully constructed facade. It was just a few classes, sir. Nothing important. Nothing important?" Ethan stepped closer, his voice dropping to a tone that somehow felt more dangerous than when he'd been demanding. "You speak sign language fluently. You mentioned linguistics, and I'm betting that's not the only language you know. What else are you hiding?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Clara could feel the eyes of other diners on them, could sense Brenda hovering nervously nearby, probably calculating how much trouble Clara was about to cause. "I should get back to work," Clara said quietly, reaching for the wine bottle. "Wait!" Ethan caught her wrist. Not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her movement. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system, and she saw something flicker in his eyes that suggested he'd felt it too. "I'm sorry, that was unnecessarily harsh." Clara looked down at his hand on her wrist, noting the expensive watch, the manicured nails, the complete absence of calluses or scars that marked a life of physical labor. When she looked back up, his expression had shifted into something almost vulnerable. "Your mother is lovely," she said softly. "She was telling me about her trip to Rome. She likes you." Ethan released her wrist, but didn't step back. "She doesn't like many people. Maybe because most people don't take the time to really listen." The words slipped out before Clara could stop them. Carrying more edge than she'd intended, Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly, and for a moment she thought she saw the hint of a smile. "And you think I don't listen? I think you're used to people telling you what you want to hear." This time his smile was definitely real, transforming his entire face. "You know, you're probably right, but you didn't answer my question about the universities." Clara felt trapped, caught between the truth that could destroy her carefully built new life and the growing curiosity in Ethan's eyes. Mrs. Vance was watching their exchange with obvious interest, her knowing smile suggesting she understood more than either of them realized. "Stanford," Clara said finally, the word feeling like a confession. "I studied at Stanford." Ethan's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been respect. "Stanford has an excellent linguistics program. What made you decide to change careers?" The innocent question hit Clara like a physical blow. How could she explain that she hadn't decided anything? That her career, her life, her entire future had been stolen from her by the person she trusted most? That she was working as a waitress not by choice, but because it was the only job she could get after her reputation had been systematically destroyed? "Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan," she said instead, proud that her voice remained steady. "No," Ethan said quietly, his grey eyes studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "I suppose it doesn't." Mrs. Vance gestured to Clara, breaking the tension that had been building between them. "You two should talk more," she signed with a mischievous smile. "My son works too much and doesn't meet enough interesting people." "What did she say?" Ethan asked, his tone almost suspicious. Clara felt heat creep up her neck. "She said you work very hard." "That's not all she said. She also mentioned that you should eat more vegetables." Ethan laughed, a genuine surprised sound that made several other diners turn to look. "My mother did not sign anything about vegetables." "How would you know? You don't speak sign language." "No, but I know my mother's sense of humor. And judging by the way you're blushing, she said something designed to embarrass one or both of us." Clara opened her mouth to deny it, then realized there was no point. Ethan was clearly more perceptive than she'd given him credit for. "She thinks you should meet more interesting people." "Does she?" Ethan glanced at his mother, who was trying very hard to look innocent. "And what do you think?" "Am I meeting interesting people?" The question felt loaded with meaning Clara wasn't sure she wanted to unpack. Standing this close to him, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his reputation would indicate, and the way his suit jacket stretched across his shoulders. "I think," Clara said carefully, "that you're used to meeting people who want something from you and you don't want anything from me." The question was asked lightly, but Clara caught the underlying edge of vulnerability. How many people had disappointed him? How many relationships were built on his bank account rather than genuine connection? "I want you to let me do my job before Brenda decides I'm more trouble than I'm worth." Ethan glanced toward the hostess station where, Brenda was indeed watching their interaction, with barely concealed anxiety. Right, of course. He stepped back, but his eyes remained fixed on Clara's face. But this conversation isn't over. Sir, I have questions. Clara Jensen. The fact that he knew her full name shouldn't have surprised her. He probably knew the names of everyone who worked in places he frequented. And something tells me you have answers that might surprise me. Clara felt her carefully constructed world beginning to shift on its axis. For 3 months, she'd been just another invisible service worker, safe in her anonymity. Now Ethan Vance was looking at her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve, and that was the last thing she could afford. I should really get back to work, she said again, but this time it sounded more like a plea. Of course. Ethan stepped aside with a gesture that was almost courtly. But Clara, I'll see you next week. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a promise that made Clara's pulse quicken with equal parts anticipation and terror. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her movement across the restaurant. Mrs. Vance caught her eye as she passed, signing a quick, "He likes you." That made Clara stumble slightly over her own feet. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of wine refills and food service. But Clara was hyper-aware of Table 12. Every time she glanced in their direction, Ethan seemed to be watching her, his expression thoughtful. When they finally left, he paused at her station. "Have a good evening, Clara," he said quietly, then leaned closer. "And next time, maybe you can tell me about Rome. I have a feeling your story about studying there might be more interesting than you're letting on." Clara's blood turned to ice. She'd never mentioned Rome as Mrs. Vance had, but somehow Ethan had connected dots that Clara had been desperate to keep separate. As she watched him guide his mother toward the exit, Clara realized that her carefully maintained anonymity had just shattered completely. Ethan Vance wasn't just curious about her anymore. He was investigating. Clara's hands shook as she counted her tips at the end of the night, Ethan's parting words echoing in her mind like a warning bell. Rome. How had he known about Rome? She'd been so careful to bury that part of her life, to become someone completely different from the woman who had once negotiated million-dollar deals in boardrooms overlooking the Tiber. "You okay, girl?" Brenda appeared beside her, concern creasing her weathered features. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Clara lied, shoving the crumpled bills into her purse. "Just tired. That Vance guy really had you rattled. What was all that hand-waving about?" Clara forced a smile. "His mother is deaf." "I was just taking her compliments to the chef. Since when do you know sign language?" The question was casual, but Clara caught the underlying curiosity. She'd worked so hard to blend in, to be unremarkable. One conversation with Ethan had undone months of careful invisibility. "I picked up a few things in college," Clara said, hoping her voice sounded more casual than she felt. "Nothing fancy." Brenda's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she let it drop. "Well, whatever you did, you made an impression." "He left a $200 tip." Clara's stomach dropped. "What, 200 for a 30-minute dinner?" Brenda's eyes gleamed with a mixture of envy and suspicion. Rich guys don't tip like that, unless they're planning to come back for more than just the salmon. The implication in Brenda's tone made Clara's skin crawl. "It's not like that, Brenda. I've been working restaurants for 20 years. It's always like that with men like him. Just be careful, okay? Guys with that kind of money don't play by the same rules as the rest of us," Clara nodded. But Brenda's warning felt like closing the barn door after the horses had already escaped. Ethan Vance wasn't interested in her the way Brenda thought. He was interested in her secrets, and that was infinitely more dangerous. The subway ride to her studio apartment in Aurora, Illinois, felt longer than usual, every shadow seeming to hide potential threats. Clara had spent the last 2 years looking over her shoulder, waiting for Daniel Thorne to finish what he'd started. Her ex-fiancé had been methodical in his destruction of her life. First her reputation, then her career, finally her finances. The only thing that had saved her from complete ruin was her ability to disappear. But if Ethan started digging into her background, how long before Daniel realized she wasn't as destroyed as he'd believed? How long before he decided to finish the job? Clara's phone buzzed as she climbed the 3 flights to her apartment. Unknown number. Hope you don't mind. I got your number from the restaurant's HR department. This is Ethan Vance. I wanted to thank you for being so kind to my mother tonight. She hasn't stopped talking about you. Ethan. Clara stared at the message, her heart hammering against her ribs. HR department. Of course, men like Ethan didn't ask for permission. They simply took what they wanted. The casual violation of her privacy should have made her angry, but instead it filled her with bone-deep terror. She started to type a polite response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. Finally, she turned off her phone without responding at all. Her apartment was exactly what someone would expect for a waitress in Aurora. Small, sparse, furnished with cast-offs and clearance items. But hidden beneath her mattress was a lockbox containing her real treasures. A Stanford MBA, a CPA license, and documents proving ownership of patents that Daniel had stolen along with everything else. Clara pulled out her laptop, a relic from her previous life that she'd managed to hide from the creditors. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard before typing in the search terms she'd avoided for 2 years. Daniel Thorne and Zenith Financial. The results made her stomach lurch. Daniel's company had grown exponentially since her exile, built on the foundation of her stolen work. But it was the recent news that made her blood run cold. Zenith Financial announces merger with Vance Industries. Ethan Vance, Daniel Thorne, partners. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, stifling the scream that wanted to escape. It couldn't be a coincidence. Daniel was many things, cruel, calculating, utterly without conscience. But he wasn't careless. If he was partnering with Ethan, it was for a reason. Had he somehow discovered where she was? Was Ethan's sudden interest in her part of some elaborate plan to finish what Daniel had started? Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ethan. I know you're probably tired, but I can't stop thinking about our conversation. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Somewhere we can actually talk. Ethan. Clara stared at the message until the words blurred together. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear again, before whatever web Daniel was spinning could trap her. But running required money she didn't have, and she was tired of being afraid. More than that, she was tired of being invisible. Against every rational thought in her head, Clara typed back, I work tomorrow night, but I'm free for lunch. The response came immediately. Perfect. I'll pick you up at noon. Wear something comfortable. I have a feeling we're going to be doing a lot of talking. Clara set her phone aside and buried her face in her hands. She was either about to make the biggest mistake of her life or finally take the first step toward reclaiming it. Either way, there was no going back now. The next morning brought a text message that made Clara question her sanity all over again. Change of plans. Meet me at the Stanford University campus, the steps of Green Library. I want to see where you studied. Clara's blood turned to ice. Stanford, he was already investigating her background, already connecting dots she'd tried desperately to erase. The casual mention of her alma mater felt like a trap closing around her. But what choice did she have? Running would only confirm his suspicions, and she was tired of living like a ghost. Clara dressed carefully in the one outfit she'd salvaged from her previous life, a simple black dress that had cost more than she now made in 2 months. It felt strange against her skin, like wearing a costume from a play she'd forgotten how to perform. The campus was alive with the energy of students rushing between classes, their faces bright with the kind of optimism Clara remembered feeling once upon a time. 1731. She found Ethan exactly where he'd said he'd be, sitting on the library steps with 2 coffee cups and an expression of barely contained curiosity. He looked different in the daylight, younger somehow, less intimidating. His dark hair caught the autumn sunlight, and he'd traded his expensive suit for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Clara's monthly rent, but looked effortlessly casual. "You found me," he said, standing to offer her one of the coffee cups. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," Clara admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. It was from the expensive place near campus, she realized, not the usual diner brew she'd grown accustomed to. "But you did, why?" The question was asked lightly, but Clara caught the underlying intensity. Everything about Ethan suggested a man accustomed to getting answers, to solving puzzles. She was just his latest mystery to unravel. "Because I'm tired of running from my past," she said, surprising herself with the honesty. Ethan's expression shifted, becoming almost gentle. "Are you running from something specific, or just running in general? What makes you think I'm running at all?" "Clara, you're 26 years old, with a Stanford education, and you're working as a waitress in Chicago. You speak multiple languages. You understand fine wine. And yesterday you corrected my pronunciation of a French word under your breath. Either you're running from something, or you're researching a very elaborate character for a novel." Clara nearly choked on her coffee. "You heard that? I hear everything. Occupational hazard of being in business. You learn to notice details other people miss." Ethan settled back down on the steps, gesturing for her to join him. "So, what's the story?" "Bad breakup, family scandal, student loans the size of a small country's national debt." His tone was light, almost joking, but Clara could see the sharp intelligence behind his grey eyes. He was giving her an opening to tell him a version of the truth, to control the narrative before he uncovered it himself. "All of the above," Clara said finally, settling beside him with careful distance between them. "Plus some creative financial planning by someone I trusted. Someone stole from you." It wasn't a question, and the matter-of-fact way he said it made something tight in Clara's chest loosen slightly. No judgment, no pity, just acknowledgement of a fact. "Someone stole everything from me," Clara corrected. "My work, my reputation, my future. I'm not just running from debt, Ethan. I'm running from the person who destroyed my entire life and convinced everyone that I deserved it." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers wrapped around his coffee cup. "Daniel Thorne," he said finally. Clara's cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, coffee splashing across the stone steps. "How do you?" "Because I know Daniel Thorne very well," Ethan said quietly. "And if he's the one who did this to you, then we have a problem." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clara grabbed Ethan's arm without thinking, her fingernails digging into the expensive cashmere. "You know him?" "How do you know him?" Ethan looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up to her face. "Clara, Daniel Thorne is my business partner. We're about to close the biggest deal of both our careers." The words hit Clara like physical blows. Of course, Daniel would find a way to insert himself back into her life just when she was starting to feel safe. Of course, he would use someone like Ethan, someone she was actually starting to trust as his weapon. "This is a setup," Clara whispered, releasing Ethan's arm and starting to stand. "This whole thing, the restaurant, your mother, the interest in my background. He sent you." "No," Ethan caught her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. "Clara, I swear to you, Daniel has no idea I'm here. I don't know what he did to you, but us talking, this has nothing to do with him." "I don't believe you." "Then let me prove it." Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. "I'm going to call him right now. I'm going to tell him I met someone who went to Stanford, someone who knows him. Watch his reaction." Clara wanted to run, but something in Ethan's expression held her frozen. He pressed the call button and put the phone on speaker. "Ethan?" Daniel's voice filled the space between them, as smooth and charming as Clara remembered. "Perfect timing. I was just reviewing the merger documents. Everything looks—" "Daniel, a quick question. I met someone yesterday who says they know you from business school." Clara Jensen, linguistics background, worked in finance for a while. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara could practically feel Daniel's shock radiating through the phone connection. Clara Jensen, that name doesn't ring a bell. Should it? The lie came so easily, so smoothly, that Clara felt nauseated. 2 years of her life, 2 years of love and trust and shared dreams, and Daniel could dismiss her existence without even a pause. "Maybe I misunderstood," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. "She seemed pretty sure she knew you. Said you worked together on some financial projects." "You know how it is, Ethan. Business school creates a lot of casual connections. Maybe we were in a study group together or something. I honestly can't place her." Clara made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "A study group. 3 years of partnership, 2 years of engagement, and Daniel was reducing their relationship to a casual study group." "Right. Well, if you remember anything, let me know. I'll talk to you later about the Steinberg contracts." "Of course. And Ethan, be careful about people claiming to know me from the past. You'd be surprised how many people try to use fake connections to get close to successful men, like yourself." The call ended, leaving Clara and Ethan sitting in stunned silence. "Fake connections," Clara repeated numbly. "And that's what our engagement was, apparently. A fake connection." Ethan was staring at his phone like it had personally offended him. "You were engaged to Daniel Thorne for 2 years? We were business partners for 3 years before that." Clara felt disconnected from her own voice, like she was listening to someone else tell her story. "We built Zenith Financial together. Every algorithm, every client strategy, every innovation that made the company successful. That was my work, my ideas. And he stole it all. He did more than steal it. He made sure everyone believed I was the one stealing from him. Falsified documents, manipulated financial records, convinced our clients that I was embezzling. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd already filed charges against me and frozen all my accounts." Ethan's jaw was clenched so tight, Clara could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. "The charges didn't stick, obviously, or you'd be in prison." "They didn't stick because Daniel dropped them at the last minute. Said he didn't want to ruin my life over a misunderstanding. Made himself look magnanimous while ensuring that everyone still believed I was guilty. Who drops theft charges against someone unless they're absolutely certain the person is guilty, but they're feeling charitable? That's—" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, displacing the careful styling. "That's diabolical. That's Daniel." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "And now he's your business partner, so I guess the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his grey eyes unreadable. Then he stood up and extended his hand to her. "I'm going to find out the truth," he said simply. "And then I'm going to make sure Daniel Thorne pays for what he did to you." The words should have filled Clara with hope, but all she felt was weary resignation. Men like Daniel didn't pay for their crimes. They profited from them. And men like Ethan, no matter how sincere they seemed, always chose money over justice when the moment of truth arrived. But when she looked up at his outstretched hand, something in his expression made her chest tighten with an emotion she'd thought Daniel had killed forever. Hope. Against her better judgment, Clara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you risk a business deal to help someone you barely know?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, like he could see straight through all her carefully constructed defenses. "Because," he said finally, "I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me. And yesterday, for the first time in years, I met someone who just wanted to be kind to my mother, someone who didn't even know who I was, who had no agenda except basic human decency." He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that sent heat shooting up her arm. "And because Daniel Thorne just lied to my face about knowing you, which means everything you've told me is probably true, And everything he's told me is probably a lie. Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. When was the last time someone had believed her without proof, without documentation, without endless explanations? "What if you're wrong?" she whispered. "What if I'm the liar?" Ethan smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. "Then I guess I'm about to make a very expensive mistake. But something tells me that's not the case." He started walking, still holding her hand, and Clara found herself following. "Where are we going?" "To my office. I want to show you something." "Ethan, I can't. People will see your reputation." "Clara," he stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I don't care about my reputation. I care about the truth. And I have a feeling that the truth about Daniel Thorne is going to be very, very interesting." As they walked across campus together, Clara caught glimpses of their reflection in building windows. The billionaire and the waitress, their lives intersecting in ways that should have been impossible. But for the first time in 2 years, Clara felt like she might be more than just a victim of Daniel's ambition. She felt like she might be someone worth fighting for. Ethan's office occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming tower in downtown Chicago, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. Clara tried not to gawk as they walked through the reception area, where assistants in designer suits moved with quiet efficiency, and everything from the furniture to the artwork screamed old money and careful taste. Mr. Vance, his assistant, rose as they approached, her professional smile faltering slightly when she saw Clara. "You're not scheduled to be in today." "Change of plans." "Lisa, hold my calls for the next hour." Ethan guided Clara toward the massive double doors of his private office. "And Lisa, complete confidentiality on this meeting." "Of course." "Sir." Clara felt the weight of Lisa's curious gaze as they passed, and she was acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her simple black dress. Amid all this corporate luxury, Ethan's office was even more impressive than the reception area. A masculine space of dark wood and leather that somehow managed to feel warm rather than intimidating. "Drink?" Ethan moved toward a sidebar that looked like it contained bottles worth more than Clara's annual salary. "I'm fine, thank you." Clara remained standing near the door, suddenly unsure why she'd agreed to come here. "Ethan, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish? Even if everything I've told you is true, Daniel is still your business partner. You can't what? Hold him accountable for his actions?" Ethan poured himself 2 fingers of what looked like very expensive scotch. "Clara, if Daniel Thorne destroyed your life for his own profit, then he's exactly the kind of person I don't want as a partner. But the money, there's always another deal." Ethan settled into one of the leather chairs facing his desk and gestured for Clara to join him. "There's not always another chance to do the right thing." Clara perched on the edge of the opposite chair, her entire body tense with nervous energy. "You say that now, but when you see the numbers involved, when your board starts asking questions, my board works for me, not the other way around." Ethan's tone was mild, but Clara caught the steel underneath. "And the numbers don't matter if they're built on fraud." He leaned forward, his grey eyes intense. "Tell me about the patents, Clara. Daniel's company has registered 17 patents in the last 2 years, all related to algorithmic trading and risk assessment. How many of those did you develop?" Clara's breath caught. "How did you—" "Because I've been reviewing Zenith's assets as part of our due diligence, and something about the filing dates bothered me. 17 patents, all filed within 6 months of each other, all supposedly developed by Daniel's team." Ethan pulled out a tablet and scrolled through several documents. "But when I looked at Daniel's educational background, his previous work history, nothing suggested he had the technical expertise to develop this kind of sophisticated financial modeling." Clara felt like the room was spinning. "You investigated him?" "I investigate all my potential partners. The question is, why didn't I find any mention of you in the company's history?" Ethan's voice was gentle, but his questions were surgical in their precision. If you were truly a partner for 3 years, if you contributed to the development of these technologies, there should be records, incorporation documents, partnership agreements, employee records, because Daniel erased me. Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. After he filed the charges, after he convinced everyone I was a thief, he had my name removed from everything. Partnership agreements were rewritten to show that I was only ever an employee. Patent applications were amended to remove my name from the inventor credits. He made it look like I never existed. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. His fingers steepled in front of his face. That level of systematic documentation fraud. Clara, that's not just unethical, that's criminal. Good luck proving it. Daniel is very thorough and he has very expensive lawyers. So do I. Ethan reached for his phone. Lisa, get me Arthur Sterling at Sterling Webb and Associates. Yes, I know it's Saturday. Tell him it's urgent. Clara shot to her feet. Ethan, no, you can't. This will destroy your deal. Good. Ethan's voice was flat, final. If this deal is built on stolen intellectual property, then it needs to be destroyed. You don't understand what you're risking, and you don't understand what I'm worth. Ethan set his phone aside and stood to face her. Clara, I could lose this entire deal and 10 more like it, and still have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. What I can't afford to lose is my integrity. The simple statement hit Clara like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had chosen principles over profit? When was the last time someone had risked anything real to defend her? Why? She asked, the word barely audible. Why are you doing this? Ethan moved closer. Close enough that Clara could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, could smell the subtle cologne that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Because yesterday, you could have simply taken my mother's compliments to the chef and walked away. Instead, you spent 10 minutes talking to her about her travels, asking about her experiences, treating her like a person instead of an inconvenience. He paused, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. Because you speak 5 languages, but you're serving wine for tips. Because you have a Stanford MBA, but you're worried about whether your boss thinks you're more trouble than you're worth. Because everything about you suggests someone who's been systematically diminished by people who should have valued you. Clara felt tears threatening again. You're going to regret this when the lawyers start asking questions. When your board wants explanations. When Daniel starts fighting back. Let me worry about Daniel. Ethan reached out slowly, giving Clara time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The question is, are you ready to fight back? The touch was gentle, almost reverent, and Clara found herself leaning into it despite every rational thought in her head. I don't know how anymore. He took everything, Ethan. My work, my reputation, my confidence. I don't even know who I am without all of that. I know who you are. Ethan's other hand came up to frame her face, his touch warm against her skin. You're someone who spent 3 years building a company from nothing. Someone who developed technology advanced enough to make Daniel Thorne willing to commit fraud to steal it. Someone who lost everything and still found the grace to be kind to a lonely old woman in a restaurant. His thumbs traced across her cheekbones. And Clara felt something inside her chest crack open, something that had been frozen solid for 2 years. You're someone worth fighting for, Clara Jensen. The question is, do you believe that? Clara stared up at him. This impossible man who was willing to risk millions of dollars for someone he'd known for 2 days. Everything about the situation was insane. The timing, the circumstances, the way her heart was racing from his touch. But for the first time in 2 years, Clara felt like herself again. Not the diminished, frightened woman Daniel had created, but the person she'd been before. Intelligent, capable, worth defending. I want to believe it, she whispered. Then let me prove it to you. Before Clara could ask what he meant, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. "What is it?" Clara asked. "Text from Daniel. He wants to move up our meeting to Monday. Says he has some exciting new developments to discuss." Clara felt ice form in her stomach. "Ethan, you have to be careful. If he even suspects that you know about me, he won't, because as far as Daniel Thorne knows, I'm just another greedy businessman interested in his profit margins." Ethan's smile was sharp, predatory. He has no idea what's coming. Clara wanted to warn him again, to explain just how dangerous Daniel could be when cornered. But the determination in Ethan's eyes reminded her of something she'd almost forgotten. What it felt like to have someone in her corner, someone willing to fight her battles alongside her. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. Ethan's expression softened. "I need you to trust me." "Can you do that?" Trust. The word that Daniel had weaponized against her, that she'd sworn never to give to anyone again. But looking into Ethan's grey eyes, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. The tentative beginning of faith. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I can do that." Ethan's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Good, because Monday morning, Daniel Thorne is going to discover that his past has finally caught up with him." As Ethan pulled her into his arms, Clara allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, justice wasn't as dead as she'd believed. And if it was, at least she wouldn't be facing Daniel's wrath alone this time. For the first time in 2 years, Clara Jensen was no longer running. She was ready to fight back. Monday morning arrived with the kind of grey, overcast sky that seemed to mirror Clara's mood as she sat in the coffee shop across from Ethan's building, watching the entrance through rain-streaked windows. He'd insisted she stay away from the office during his meeting with Daniel, but she couldn't bring herself to go home and wait helplessly while her future was decided by 2 men in expensive suits. Her phone buzzed. "Meeting starts in 10 minutes. Remember, whatever happens, Daniel doesn't know you're involved. Stay safe." "Ethan." Clara's hands trembled as she typed back, "Be careful. He's more dangerous than you think." The response came immediately. "I know, but so am I." Clara stared at the message, trying to draw comfort from Ethan's confidence. But she knew Daniel in ways Ethan couldn't imagine. Knew how he could twist the truth, how he could make victims look like villains and monsters look like heroes. She'd watched him destroy other people's lives with the same calculating precision he'd used on her. 43 floors above her, Ethan Vance was about to discover just how thoroughly Daniel Thorne had played them all. Ethan straightened his tie and checked his reflection in the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything had to be perfect. His appearance, his demeanor, his questions. Daniel could never suspect that this was anything more than routine due diligence. "Mr. Vance," Lisa's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Thorne has arrived. Send him in." The conference room doors opened, and Daniel Thorne walked in with the kind of confident stride that belonged to a man who believed he owned the world. He was shorter than Ethan had remembered, with perfectly styled black hair, and a smile that seemed genuine until you looked closely at his eyes. "Ethan, good to see you." Daniel extended his hand with practiced warmth. "Thanks for moving this up. I know your schedule is insane." "Not a problem." Ethan shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip, the expensive watch, the manicured nails. Everything about Daniel screamed success, competence, trustworthiness. "Coffee, please." "So, I've been thinking about our timeline, and I believe we can accelerate the merger by at least 6 weeks. My team has identified some additional assets that weren't in the original proposal." Ethan poured coffee from the silver service. His movements deliberately casual. "Additional assets?" "Intellectual property. Mainly some proprietary algorithms that we've been developing internally." Daniel accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "I wanted to run the numbers by you before we involve the lawyers." "I appreciate that." Ethan settled into his chair. Every muscle in his body coiled with tension he was determined not to show. Tell me about these algorithms. Are they related to the risk assessment protocols you mentioned last month? Daniel's smile widened. Exactly. Revolutionary stuff, really? Predictive modeling that can identify market patterns up to 18 months in advance. It's going to revolutionize how we approach portfolio management. Impressive. Your team developed these in-house? Absolutely. My lead researcher is brilliant. PhD from MIT, years of experience in quantitative analysis. We've been working on this technology for over 3 years. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, making notes on the legal pad in front of him. And this researcher, they're comfortable with the merger? No concerns about intellectual property rights, patent disputes, that sort of thing? None at all. Clean development chain. All work done under company contract. My legal team has been very thorough about documentation. The lies came so smoothly, so confidently, that Ethan felt a cold rage building in his chest. Clara had been right. Daniel was a master manipulator, capable of rewriting history without even breaking stride. That's excellent. You know how important clean IP chains are in deals this size. Ethan sat down his pen and leaned back. I have to ask, though, 3 years of development seems like a significant investment for a company's zenith size. How did you fund the research and development? Daniel's smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly that Ethan almost missed it. Initial funding came from private investors. Then we reinvested profits as the technology proved viable. Smart money management. And your lead researcher, the MIT PhD, they've been with you the entire 3 years. Oh, longer than that. Academic background is impressive, but real-world application is what matters. We've built something truly special together. Ethan felt sick. Every word out of Daniel's mouth was a calculated distortion of the truth. A theft, not just of Clara's work, but of her very existence. The casual way he referred to their partnership, while erasing her completely, was breathtaking in its cruelty. I'd love to meet this researcher, always interested in the minds behind the innovation. Daniel's pause was barely perceptible. Unfortunately, he's in London right now working on implementation with our European partners. Very hands-on approach, you understand? Brilliant, but not much for corporate meetings, of course. Well, when he returns, I'd appreciate an introduction. Ethan reached for his coffee, using the movement to study Daniel's expression. In the meantime, I'd love to review the development documentation, timeline, methodology, testing protocols. My technical team will want to understand the architecture before we finalize terms. Naturally, I'll have my assistant prepare a comprehensive package. Daniel pulled out his phone, fingers flying over the screen. Should have everything to you by end of week. Ethan nodded, making another note. Perfect. And Daniel, I appreciate your transparency about the additional assets. Trust is the foundation of any successful partnership. Absolutely. Daniel's smile was radiant with what appeared to be genuine warmth. Honesty in business isn't just ethical, it's profitable. Lies have a way of catching up with you eventually. The irony was so thick, Ethan could taste it. Couldn't agree more. They spent another 30 minutes reviewing financial projections and merger timelines, Daniel painting a picture of exponential growth and market dominance that would have been compelling if Ethan hadn't known it was built on theft and fraud. When Daniel finally left, his handshake was firm, his demeanor confident, his promises elaborate. Ethan waited until he heard the elevator doors close before pulling out his phone. Call Arthur Sterling now. Clara was on her 3rd cup of coffee when her phone rang. Ethan's name on the screen made her heart skip. How did it go? She asked without preamble. Exactly as you predicted. He lied about everything. The development timeline, the research team, the funding sources, and Clara, he's claiming that his lead researcher is a man with a PhD from MIT. Clara's laugh was bitter. Let me guess. This mysterious researcher is conveniently unavailable for meetings. In London, apparently. Very hands-on, but not much for corporate environments. How convenient. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of Daniel's manipulations. Did he seem suspicious about your questions? Not at all. He was practically glowing with what he clearly thought was his own cleverness. Ethan's voice carried an edge of disgust. Clara, I've met some unscrupulous people in my career, but the casual way he erased your existence, it's sociopathic. I tried to warn you. You did, and you were right about everything. There was a pause. Then Ethan's voice became gentler. How are you holding up? Clara looked around the coffee shop at the normal people living normal lives, unaware that their simple Monday morning was the most surreal experience of her recent memory. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Daniel doesn't make mistakes, Ethan. If he's being this cavalier about the lies, it's because he thinks he's already won. What do you mean? I mean, he's planning something. Daniel doesn't just react to threats. He anticipates them and neutralizes them before they become problems. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain outside. Ethan, what if he knows? What if this whole thing is some elaborate trap? That's impossible. There's no way he could know we've been in contact. Are you sure? Think about it. You ask him about someone from Stanford, someone with a linguistics background who claims to know him. Then 3 days later, you're suddenly asking detailed questions about his development team and intellectual property chains. That's a hell of a coincidence. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. You think he's figured out that you're the Stanford connection? I think Daniel Thorne doesn't believe in coincidences any more than you do. Ethan's voice was tight with worry. Clara, where are you right now? Coffee shop across from your building. Why? Because if you're right, if Daniel has figured out our connection, then you're not safe. He destroyed your life once when you were an inconvenience. What do you think he'll do if he sees you as a direct threat? Clara felt ice forming in her stomach. She'd been so focused on the possibility of justice, on the hope of vindication, that she hadn't fully considered what Daniel might do to protect himself. And Daniel had never been one to leave loose ends. Ethan, I should disappear tonight. Leave the city. Change my name again. No. Ethan's voice was firm. Running didn't work the first time, and it won't work now. Daniel will just follow you. And next time you won't have anyone watching your back. Then what do you suggest? I suggest we force his hand. Make him come to us, instead of letting him hunt you down on his timeline. Clara's grip tightened on her phone. That's suicide. You don't understand what he's capable of. And you don't understand what I'm capable of. Ethan's tone carried a confidence that was both reassuring and terrifying. Clara, I didn't build $1 billion company by backing down from fights. And I sure as hell am not going to let Daniel Thorne intimidate the woman He stopped abruptly, and Clara's heart stuttered. The woman you what? She whispered. The woman I care about, Ethan said quietly. More than I should, considering we've known each other for 3 days. But there it is. Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Ethan, I know it's crazy. I know the timing is terrible, and the circumstances are impossible. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since Saturday night. The way you talked to my mother, the way you stood up to me when I was being an ass. The strength it took to rebuild your life after Daniel destroyed it. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're brilliant and kind and stronger than you think you are. I know you deserve justice, and I know I want to be the one to help you get it. Ethan paused. And I know that I'm not letting Daniel Thorne hurt you again. Clara wiped away a tear, amazed that she had any left after 2 years of crying. What if we can't prove what he did? What if his lawyers are better than yours? What if? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Clara, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Trust, the word that had become her enemy. The concept that Daniel had poisoned so thoroughly that Clara had thought she'd never be able to embrace it again. But sitting in this ordinary coffee shop, listening to Ethan promise to fight for her, Clara felt something shift in her chest. Maybe trust wasn't about never being hurt again. Maybe it was about believing that someone was worth the risk of being hurt. "Yes," she said softly. "I trust you." "Good, because I have a plan." 20 minutes later, Clara was back in Ethan's office, listening to him outline a strategy that was either brilliant or completely insane. "You want me to call Daniel directly?" Clara stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Ethan, that's exactly what he's expecting. He's probably already planning how to use any contact from me against us. That's what makes it perfect." Ethan was pacing behind his desk, his energy crackling with determination. "He expects you to hide, to stay in the shadows while other people fight your battles. The last thing he's prepared for is you walking straight into his office and demanding answers, because it's suicide. Because it's unexpected." Ethan stopped pacing and fixed her with an intense stare. "Clara, think about it. For 2 years, you've been running from Daniel, letting him control the narrative. What if you stopped running? What if you took control back?" Clara felt a flutter of something that might have been excitement mixing with her terror. "Even if I wanted to confront him, which I don't, what would be the point? He'll just lie, manipulate, turn it around on me like he always does." "Not if you're not going in alone." Ethan pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call Daniel right now. I'm going to tell him that my technical team has identified some inconsistencies in his IP documentation, and I need to meet with his lead researcher to clarify a few points. He'll make excuses. The researcher's in London, remember? Then I'll tell him it's urgent enough to bring the researcher back. I'll make it clear that the deal depends on it." Ethan's smile was sharp. "Trust me, Daniel won't risk losing this merger over a simple meeting." Clara felt her pulse quicken. "And then you walk into that meeting as Dr. Clara Jensen, independent consultant specializing in algorithmic trading systems. Someone I've hired to verify the authenticity of his intellectual property." The audacity of the plan took Clara's breath away. "He'll recognize me immediately." "Of course he will. And he'll be so shocked that he'll reveal more than he intends to. Daniel's strength is his ability to control situations, to manipulate from the shadows. But put him face to face with someone he thought he'd destroyed, someone who's clearly not the broken victim he expected. He'll make mistakes." Clara could see the logic, but the thought of facing Daniel again made her feel sick. What if he refuses to meet? What if he calls security? What if he tries to have me arrested? On what charges? Being in a business meeting? "Clara, you're not a fugitive. You were never even formally charged with anything. Daniel's power over you exists only as long as you believe it does." Ethan moved around the desk to stand in front of her, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. "I know you're scared. I know the last time you trusted someone, it ended in disaster. But this time is different. How? Because this time you're not alone. This time you have someone who believes you. Someone who's willing to fight for you. This time you have me." Clara looked up into his grey eyes and saw something that made her chest tighten with emotion. Not pity, not charity, but genuine care, respect. The kind of partnership she thought she'd had with Daniel, but real this time. "What if we're wrong?" she whispered. "What if this destroys your company, your reputation, everything you've worked for?" Ethan's hands moved to cup her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Then I'll rebuild. But Clara, I can't rebuild my integrity if I walk away from this. I can't look at myself in the mirror if I let Daniel Thorne win." His voice dropped to something almost intimate. "And I can't lose you now that I found you." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Clara wasn't sure she was ready to handle. But the sincerity in Ethan's expression, the gentle way he was touching her, the absolute certainty in his voice, it all combined to break through the last of her resistance. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's do it." Ethan's smile was like sunrise. "You sure?" "I'm terrified, but yes, I'm sure." Clara took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside her chest. "It's time to stop running." Ethan pulled her into his arms. Then holding her tight against his chest, and Clara allowed herself to draw strength from his warmth, his confidence, his absolute faith that justice was possible. Tomorrow she would face Daniel Thorne for the first time in 2 years. Tomorrow she would either reclaim her life or watch it be destroyed all over again. But tonight, for the first time since her world had collapsed, Clara Jensen felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The Zenith financial offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the financial district of Chicago. All clean lines and modern efficiency designed to project success and stability. Clara stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring up at the building that had once represented all her dreams, now turned into the monument to her nightmares. Second thoughts. Ethan appeared beside her, 2 coffee cups in hand, about 100 of them. Clara accepted the coffee gratefully, needing the warmth against the October chill. I used to love this building. Daniel and I picked it together, spent hours planning how we designed the offices, talking about the company we were going to build. And you did build it. The fact that he stole credit doesn't change that. Clara looked at Ethan, taking in the expensive suit, the confident posture, the way he seemed to command space just by existing. Are you sure about this plan? Once we walk in there, there's no going back. I'm sure. Ethan's voice was steady, calm. The question is, are you ready? Clara thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, confident, successful, naive enough to believe that hard work and talent were enough to protect her from people like Daniel. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, scared, diminished, invisible. But standing here with Ethan, feeling his absolute faith in her, Clara realized she didn't want to be either of those women anymore. She wanted to be someone new, someone who had been broken, but had learned how to rebuild herself stronger. I'm ready, she said, and meant it. They crossed the street together, Ethan's hand warm and reassuring on the small of her back. The lobby was exactly as Clara remembered. Marble floors, abstract art, the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about money. The security guard at the front desk looked up as they approached, his expression shifting to professional attention when he recognized Ethan. Mr. Vance, good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, James. We're here to see Daniel Thorne. He's expecting us. Of course, sir. The 2nd floor. The elevators are... I remember, Clara said quietly, then caught herself. James was looking at her with puzzled recognition, clearly trying to place where he'd seen her before. Dr. Jensen is consulting on our merger, Ethan said smoothly. Intellectual property verification. Of course. Have a good meeting. As they rode the elevator up, Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs, the familiar numbers climbing on the display. 20, 25, 30. Each one bringing her closer to a confrontation she'd spent 2 years avoiding. Breathe, Ethan said quietly, his hand finding hers. Remember, you belong here. This company exists because of your work. The elevator doors opened onto the familiar reception area, all glass and chrome and carefully curated success. Behind the reception desk sat a young woman Clara didn't recognize. Danielle had clearly replaced the entire staff after Clara's departure. Mr. Vance, the receptionist, stood with practiced smile. Mr. Thorne is waiting for you in the main conference room. They followed her down a hallway, lined with framed articles about Zenith's success. Awards for innovation, photos of Daniel at various industry events. Clara's stomach clenched as she realized that in 2 years, Daniel had built an entire mythology around himself, a carefully crafted narrative in which she had never existed. The conference room doors opened, and there he was. Daniel Thorne looked exactly the same. Perfectly styled black hair, expensive suit, that practiced smile that had once made Clara's heart skip. He was standing at the head of the conference table, clearly positioned to project authority and control. And for a moment, Clara felt herself shrinking back into the scared, diminished woman she'd been. Then Ethan's hand pressed against her back, warm and steady, and Clara remembered who she was fighting for. "Ethan!" Daniel's voice was warm, welcoming, giving no sign that anything was amiss. "Right on time, and you must be Dr. Jensen." Daniel's eyes met Clara's across the room, and she saw the exact moment when recognition hit. His face went completely blank for perhaps 3 seconds, long enough for Clara to see shock, calculation, and something that might have been fear flicker across his features. Then the mask slammed back into place. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his voice carefully modulated. "Have we met before? You look familiar." The casual dismissal, the pretense that she was a stranger, hit Clara like a physical blow. But instead of the crushing despair she'd expected, she felt something else entirely. Rage. Pure, clean, energizing fury that burned away 2 years of fear and self-doubt. "We've met," Clara said quietly, walking into the room with her head held high. "Though I'm not surprised you don't remember. You always were better at forgetting inconvenient people." Daniel's smile never wavered, but Clara caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I'm afraid I don't follow." "Clara Jensen," she said clearly, extending her hand in a gesture of mock politeness. "Former partner and co-founder of Zenith Financial, though I believe your current version of history has me listed as never existed." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at Clara's outstretched hand like it might bite him, while Ethan watched the entire exchange with sharp attention. "I think there might be some confusion," Daniel said finally, not taking her hand. "Zenith has never had a partner named Clara Jensen." "Really?" Clara pulled out her phone and opened a photo album she'd thought she'd never use again. "Then perhaps you can explain these." She showed him the screen, a photo of Daniel and Clara at Zenith's launch party, arms around each other, both grinning at the camera. Daniel's face in the photo was radiant, with what had appeared to be genuine love and pride. Daniel glanced at the photo and shrugged. "I attend a lot of industry events. I'm sure I've taken pictures with hundreds of people over the years." Clara swiped to the next photo. Daniel and Clara in the office late at night, working on code together. Her engagement ring clearly visible on her left hand. Then another, Daniel kissing Clara's cheek at what was clearly an intimate dinner, not a business function. "Hundreds of people," Clara repeated quietly. "Is that what I was to you, Daniel? Just another face in the crowd? I'm sorry, but I really don't know what you're hoping to accomplish here." Daniel turned to Ethan with an expression of professional confusion. "Ethan, I'm not sure what this woman has told you." "But this woman," Ethan interrupted, his voice deadly quiet, "is Dr. Clara Jensen, who holds patents for 17 of the technologies your company claims to have developed. The same technologies you've been trying to sell to me as part of our merger." Daniel's mask slipped for just a moment, and Clara saw real fear flash across his face. "That's impossible. All of Zenith's intellectual property was developed internally by my team." "Your team?" Clara repeated. "Do you mean the team of one MIT PhD who's conveniently in London and unavailable for meetings? I don't know what game you're playing here." "I'm not playing anything, Daniel." Clara's voice was steady now, strengthened by 2 years of pain that had finally found its purpose. "I'm here to collect what you stole from me?" Daniel laughed, a sound that was probably meant to convey incredulous amusement, but came out strained and artificial. "Stole? That's a very serious accusation." "Yes, it is." Clara pulled out a tablet and opened a file folder. "Would you like to see the original development notes for the risk assessment algorithm, the ones written in my handwriting dated 6 months before you filed the patent? Or perhaps the emails where you asked me to explain the technical specifications because you couldn't understand the code?" Daniel's face was beginning to show cracks in its composure. "Anyone can forge documents." "Anyone can," Clara agreed. "But these aren't forgeries. They're backups from my personal cloud storage, complete with metadata showing when they were created, when they were last modified, what device they were created on." She looked directly into Daniel's eyes. "Would you like to explain to Ethan why the foundational technology for your company was developed on my personal laptop?" "This is ridiculous." Daniel turned to Ethan, desperation beginning to creep into his voice. "Ethan, surely you can see what this is. Some disgruntled former employee trying to—" "Former employee?" Clara's voice cut through his protestations like a blade. "Is that what you're calling it now, Daniel? We were engaged for 2 years. We built this company together. We shared a bed, shared a life, shared dreams about the future we were going to create." She stood up, moving around the table until she was close enough to see the fear in Daniel's eyes. "And when you decided you wanted it all for yourself, you didn't just steal my work. You stole my life. You destroyed my reputation, froze my assets, turned everyone against me, and then had the audacity to act like I never existed. You filed fraud charges against me that you knew were false, then dropped them at the last minute to make yourself look magnanimous while ensuring everyone still believed I was guilty." Clara's voice was gaining strength with every word. "You rewrote our partnership agreements to make me look like just an employee. You removed my name from patent applications. You erased me, Daniel." Daniel looked between Clara and Ethan, clearly calculating his options. "Even if any of that were true." "It is true," Ethan said quietly. "Every word of it." Daniel's attention snapped to Ethan. "You believe her? Ethan, this woman is clearly unstable. She's telling the truth." Ethan pulled out his own tablet, opening it to a document Clara recognized. "Because my legal team has spent the last 3 days investigating Zenith's intellectual property claims. And guess what we found?" Daniel went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the original patent applications tell a very different story than the current ones. Metadata analysis shows that your patents were systematically altered to remove Clara's name as co-inventor. The dates of invention were changed. The technical specifications were rewritten to hide the fact that the work was done on external systems." Ethan stood up, his presence suddenly filling the room with quiet menace. "We also found the original partnership agreements, Daniel, the ones that show Clara as an equal partner, not an employee. The ones that were altered 6 months after she left the company." Daniel's face had gone pale. "Those are sealed corporate documents. You have no legal right." "I have every legal right to investigate the intellectual property I'm considering purchasing." Ethan's voice was like ice. "And what I've discovered is that you're trying to sell me stolen goods." "This is insane," Daniel said. But his voice lacked conviction. "You're talking about destroying a billion-dollar deal based on the word of a woman who created the technology that makes your company valuable." Clara finished. "A woman who trusted you with everything and got betrayed for her faith." Daniel looked trapped, his usual smooth confidence completely shattered. "Clara, look, maybe we can work something out. If you feel like you deserve compensation for your contributions." "Compensation?" Clara's laugh was bitter. "Daniel, you don't get to negotiate your way out of theft. You don't get to offer me a settlement for stealing my life's work. Then what do you want?" Clara looked at this man who had once been everything to her, who had shared her dreams and her bed and her hopes for the future, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I want justice," she said simply. "I want the world to know who really built Zenith Financial. I want my name restored to every patent, every article, every piece of work you've stolen. I want a full accounting of every dollar this company has made using my technology." She paused, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. "And I want you to experience what it feels like to lose everything because someone you trusted decided to destroy you." Daniel stared at her in stunned silence, clearly recognizing the woman he'd tried to crush in the strong, determined person standing before him. "The deal is off," Ethan said quietly. "Effective immediately, and Daniel, I'll be making sure that every potential partner knows exactly what kind of business practices Zenith Financial engages in. Daniel shot to his feet, his composure finally cracking completely. You can't do this. The contracts are void due to misrepresentation of assets, Ethan replied calmly. My lawyers are already preparing the documentation. I'll fight this, Daniel said, his voice shaking with rage. I'll destroy both of you. You'll what? Clara stood up, facing Daniel without flinching. Ruin my reputation, steal my work, turn everyone against me. You already did all of that, Daniel. You took your best shot and I survived. She moved closer, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. But this time I'm not alone. This time I have someone who believes me. Someone who's willing to fight for the truth. This time, you're the one who's going to lose everything. Daniel looked between Clara and Ethan, his face cycling through rage, desperation, and something that might have been defeat. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, Clara said quietly. It is. As they walked out of the conference room, leaving Daniel sitting alone at his table, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd been carrying for 2 years. She wasn't the same broken woman who had fled this building in shame and terror. She was someone who had found her strength again. Someone who had learned that justice was possible if you were brave enough to fight for it. And she was someone who had found a partner worthy of her trust. 6 months later, Clara stood in the kitchen of Ethan's River North penthouse, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and pink. The newspaper on the counter bore a headline that still made her smile. Zenith Financial founder sentenced to 5 years for corporate fraud. Below it, a smaller story. Jensen Technologies announces record profits in first quarter. Still reading about Daniel's downfall? Ethan appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. Can you blame me? 2 years of nightmares, and now he's the one behind bars. Clara leaned back against Ethan's chest, savoring the warmth and security of his embrace. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real. Believe it. Arthur's legal team was very thorough. Ethan's voice carried deep satisfaction. Fraud, theft of intellectual property, corporate malfeasance, filing false financial documents. Daniel won't be bothering anyone for a very long time. Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had changed everything. Any regrets about walking away from the biggest deal of your career? Are you kidding? Ethan's smile was soft, genuine. Walking away from that deal was the best decision I ever made. It led me to something much more valuable. What's that? You, he said simply and kissed her forehead. Though I have to say, watching you rebuild your company from the ground up has been incredible. Jensen Technologies is going to change the industry. Clara felt a familiar flutter of pride. The last 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal battles, patent restorations, and building a new company from scratch. But with her name cleared and her technology returned to her, Clara had discovered that she was even more capable than she'd realized. Jensen Technologies already had contracts worth millions, and 3 major firms were competing to invest. We're going to change the industry, Clara corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You could have. You just needed someone to remind you how strong you are. The soft sincerity in Ethan's voice made Clara's chest tighten with emotion. Even after 6 months, she sometimes couldn't believe that this was her life. Waking up in Ethan's arms, building a company that was truly hers, facing each day without fear or shame. I have something for you, Ethan said, his tone shifting to something that sounded almost nervous. It's not my birthday. I know, but there's something I've been wanting to ask you, and I couldn't wait any longer. Clara felt her heart skip as Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught as he dropped to one knee right there in the kitchen, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows and painting everything in soft gold. Clara Jensen, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. 6 months ago, you walked into my life and turned everything upside down. You made me remember why integrity matters more than profit, why truth is worth fighting for, why love is the most important investment anyone can make. He opened the box, revealing a ring that took Clara's breath away. A classic solitaire that was elegant without being ostentatious, beautiful without being showy. Exactly what she would have chosen for herself. You've taught me that real strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up and becoming someone even better than you were before. You've shown me what it means to fight for what's right, even when the odds are impossible. Ethan paused, his grey eyes shining with emotion. I know we've only known each other for 6 months. I know it's fast, maybe even crazy, but Clara, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He took a breath, his voice dropping to something intimate and tender. I love you. I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart. I love your strength and your vulnerability. I love the way you sign to my mother, and the way you make terrible coffee, and the way you get this little crinkle between your eyebrows when you're concentrating on code. Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, the kind she'd thought she'd forgotten how to cry. Most of all, Ethan continued, I love the way you've made me want to be a better man. You've made me believe in partnership that's real, in love that's based on respect and admiration and genuine care. He looked up at her with absolute sincerity. Clara Jensen, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that not all partnerships end in betrayal? That love doesn't have to be dangerous. Clara stared down at this incredible man who had risked everything to fight for her, who had seen her at her most broken and helped her become stronger than she'd ever been. The ring in the box caught the morning light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Ethan. Yes to all of it. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were surprisingly steady, then stood and kissed her with a tenderness that made Clara's knees weak. When they broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. I can't believe you proposed to me in your kitchen, Clara said, admiring the way the ring looked on her hand. I couldn't wait for some fancy restaurant or romantic vacation. I wanted to ask you here, in the space where we've had our best conversations, where you've taught me how to really live instead of just existing. Clara looked around the kitchen that had become so familiar, so much like home, and realized he was right. This was where they'd planned strategy for the legal battles, where they'd celebrated each victory, where they'd learned to trust each other completely. Besides, Ethan added with a grin, after everything we've been through, I figured simple and honest was better than elaborate and performative. Simple and honest, Clara repeated, thinking about how perfectly those words described what they'd built together. I like that. Ethan pulled her close again, and Clara marveled at how safe she felt in his arms, how right this all seemed. A year ago, she'd been hiding in Aurora, convinced that her life was over, that trust was impossible, that love was just another word for vulnerability. Now she was engaged to a man who had proven that partnership could be about building each other up instead of tearing each other down, that love could be a source of strength instead of weakness. So, Ethan said, his voice warm with amusement, any thoughts on wedding planning? Please tell me you're not going to be one of those brides who wants a year-long engagement and a wedding that costs more than most people's houses. Clara laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place of pure joy. Actually, I was thinking something small. Family, close friends. Maybe your mother can teach me some more sign language before the ceremony. She's going to be thrilled. She's been dropping hints about grandchildren since our 3rd date. Grandchildren? Clara raised an eyebrow. We just got engaged 30 seconds ago and you're already thinking about kids. With you, I'm thinking about everything.